All right, welcome to Book by Book for April 13, 2022. And we are going to be going over Judges 9 through 12 this evening. And this is going to have two main people that we're going to be looking at, but there's some minor judges that we're going to be seeing as well in this section. And so we are, so there's a lot going on, but I was looking at different breakdowns, and a lot of people ended at 11 and then went 12 into Samson, but I wanted to give more time to just Samson. So we're going to kind of hit a lot of folks tonight. And we're going to start with Abimelech, who is the son of Gideon. And if we remember last week, Gideon, people came to say, hey, will you be king? And he's like, no, I won't be king. But he named his son my father is king. And so kind of give us a bit of a indication that he was acting like a king in various ways. And so when we read Jerubbaal, that is Gideon here. But this is really a turning point towards greater degeneracy in the nation of Israel. They are going to continue to get worse and worse. And so we're going to look at Abimelech's story, and the other major story is Jephthah, and he is also kind of he's an interesting character because he is used by the Lord, but he also is rash and makes some bad decisions. And so we're going to see a heartbreaking story as well tonight. And so let's jump in. Judges chapter 9, starting in verse 1. Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to his mother's brothers in Shechem and said to them and to all his mother's clan, ask all the citizens of Shechem, which is better for you, to have all 70 of Jerubbaal's sons rule over you, or just one man? Remember, I am your flesh and blood. When the brothers repeated all this to the citizens of Shechem, they were inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is related to us. They gave him 70 shekels of silver from the temple of Baal Berith, and Abimelech used it to hire reckless scoundrels who became his followers. He went to his father's home in Ophrah, and on one stone murdered his 70 brothers, the sons of Jerubbaal. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, escaped by hiding. Then all the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo gathered beside the great tree at the pillar of Shechem to crown Abimelech king. Now, we don't have, at this point in the history of Israel, an actual monarchy. And that is one of the challenges that we have throughout the book of Judges is, in those days, Israel had no king, and everybody did whatever they saw fit in their own eyes, is a refrain that he comes back up later. And so here, Gideon, Jerubbaal had 70 sons, and those 70 sons probably oversaw 70 different towns. And so he was not a king, but he had a great influence over a large region for the people of Israel. And so that when, instead of trying to have all of these 70 sons rule after Jerubbaal's death, his one son Abimelech, who is a half of Gideon's family, he's kind of a half-breed type person. He's not fully of one tribe, and so he goes to the people in Shechem and says, "Why don't you make me king, and we'll have one ruler instead of 70?" And they say, "This sounds like a good idea." But what he does here is he goes and kills all of his brothers. And there's a couple things that we should note. First, they agreed with Shechem because he is closely related to them in their town. The Shechemites were on board because, it's his hometown hero for them. He goes and hires mercenaries, these reckless scoundrels, these mercenaries to become his enforcers for his regime that he's establishing. But then he goes to he also then takes his 70 brothers to the one stone in Ophrah. And if we remember the story of Gideon, this one stone, it could be the actual threshing floor that the people of Ophrah would have been using. And if we remember Gideon's request to the Lord for the fleece, he went to the Lord and said, if I'm going to put this fleece out overnight, and if the fleece is wet with dew, but the ground is dry, then I'll know. And then that happened. And then the next day he was like, okay, Lord, I need one more sign overnight. If the fleece is dry and the ground is wet, then I'll know. And so this one stone could be that place that Shechem, or that Abimelech went and killed his brothers. And so in one place where we see God's faithfulness to the people of Israel by bringing up a leader to rescue them, then the very next generation, Abimelech, goes to that same place and flaunts his faithlessness. And so he's a terrible person. And so he kills his brothers except for Jotham, and Jotham is able to escape and hide as he is somehow just able to escape. One other thing in here that I wanted to highlight, this temple, they give Abimelech money from the temple of Baal Beret. And now Baal Beret means Lord of the Covenant. And so that is not the name of Yahweh, the God of the people of Israel. This is some kind, but Yahweh is a covenant making God for the Israelites. And so what this may be is some kind of syncretism between worship of Yahweh and the Baals of the people of Canaan. And they're saying, no, God made a covenant with us. And so they're like trying to bring in this God of the covenant idea and Yahweh, and making a big, huge mess. And so there is unfaithfulness even there. And, the people of Israel, they did not have a temple at this time. And so that's another indicator that this is a temple that was part of the Canaanite community, and the people probably, as they spread out into the region, just the people, the Israelite tribes that went into that region, they probably just assumed that building as the place that they were going to attempt to worship Yahweh, the God who rescued them from slavery in Egypt and brought them into the promised land. But it became just a syncretistic mess. And so this Baal Berit is not the Lord. It's a covenant making God, but not the covenant God, not the God who made the covenant with Moses and the people of Israel. So that's going to be important as we see, because the people of Israel throughout the Judges, they keep falling into the other worship of other gods, which is abandoning the covenant that the Lord made with them. And so all of the hardship that they experience is because of their abandonment of God. So verse 7 picks up, when Jotham was told about this, he climbed up on the top of Mount Gerizim and shouted to them, listen to me, citizens of Shechem, so that God may listen to you. One day, I'll pause there. Okay, so Shechem is an important city. It is part of the people of Jacob's family. Like Jacob had some significant moments there that we went over in our time in Genesis. But Mount Gerizim is where the priests were to lead the people in a covenant renewal when they came into the land. And so there's these two, Gerizim and Ebal. And so Shechem is in the middle. It's on this trade route on this way between these two mountains. And so you could get up on Mount Gerizim, and the natural acoustics would carry your voice pretty well in that region. So he could get up and he's going to essentially use a parable to give a prophetic warning to the people of Shechem because of their unfaithfulness. And so here on the mountain that is supposed to be the renewal of the covenant, the very thing that they said, like, if we abandon this covenant, we will be cursed. That's part of what was going on at that renewal ceremony. Now that cursing is happening because of their unfaithfulness. And so there's all these little like hooks in the story that we should note as we continue moving through. This is a significant place. So one day the trees went out to anoint a king for themselves. They said to the olive tree, "Be our king." But the olive tree answered, "Should I give up my oil by which both gods and humans are honored, to hold sway over the trees?" Next the trees said to the fig tree, "Come and be our king." But the fig tree replied, "Should I give up my fruit, so good and sweet, to hold sway over the trees?" Then the trees said to the vine, "Come be our king." But the vine answered, "Should I give up my wine, which cheers both gods and humans, to hold sway over the trees?" Finally, all the trees said to the thorn bush, "Come and be our king." The thorn bush said to the trees, "If you really want to anoint me king over you, come and take refuge in my shade. But if not, then let fire come out of the thorn bush and consume the cedars of Lebanon." So in this parable, Jotham is talking about these different trees, and these are trees or vines that had value, that would add to the people, right? Like the grapes produce wine, which would be used in celebrations as well as in offerings. The fig tree was delicious and brought joy. All these different things were good and valuable and helpful. But then a thorn bush is a weed and not helpful. But the thorn bush is willing to be king if the people will come under the thorn bush's leadership over them. And so Jotham then explains it. Have you, people of Shechem, acted honorably and in good faith by making Abimelech king? Have you been fair to Jerubbaal and his family? Have you treated him as he deserves? Remember that my father fought for you and risked his life to rescue you from the hand of Midian. But today you have revolted against my father's family. You have murdered his 70 sons on a single stone and have made Abimelech, the son of his female slave, king over the citizens of Shechem, because he is related to you. So have you acted honorably and in good faith toward Jerubbaal and his family today? If you have, may Abimelech be your joy, and may you be his too. But if you have not, let fire come out from Abimelech and consume you, the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo. And let fire come out from you, the citizens of Shechem and Beth Millo, and consume Abimelech. Then Jotham fled, escaping to Beer, and he lived there because he was afraid of his brother Abimelech. And so his explanation is essentially, you just chose him because he's a hometown local, but he's not even a legitimate son. He is he wasn't like his wife's son. He was a slave's son, and you lifted up Abimelech because he is just the hometown hero, but he's a terrible person. And part of what his curse is may fire come out of him and may fire come out of you to consume both of you. And so it's kind of one of those things where two people are terrible and they're terrible to each other, and everybody else around them is like, well, they deserve each other. You're awful. Like, these people are miserable, but as long as they're miserable together and not spreading the misery around, sometimes it's just like, well, that's better than the alternative. And here, that is essentially the story is, you are choosing a terrible king and terrible things are going to happen because, there are lack of faithfulness to the Lord. And so verse 22 picks up, after Abimelech had governed Israel for 3 years, and Israel is, when we read that in Judges, we need to also recognize that governing Israel, Abimelech did not rule over all of Israel. He ruled over a large portion of Israel, but he was not the king over the whole country because there were no kings over the whole country. After 3 years, God stirred up animosity between Abimelech and the citizens of Shechem. Wait, that's what Jotham said was going to happen. So they acted treacherously against Abimelech. God did this in order that the crime against Jerubbaal's 70 sons, the shedding of their blood, might be avenged on their brothers Abimelech and on the citizens of Shechem, who had helped him murder his brothers. In opposition to him, these citizens of Shechem set men on the hilltops to ambush and rob everyone who passed by. And this was reported to Abimelech. So the people of Shechem are setting up ambushes and traps on the trade route. And this is going against whatever Abimelech wanted. And so it is reported eventually to him. But this is a cause and effect relationship. The evil of Abimelech led to the evil of the people of Shechem against Abimelech, which is what Jotham was talking about. They are terrible for each other. And this all comes back to his murder of his brothers. So in 26, we meet another person. Now, Gaal, son of Ebed, moved with his clan into Shechem, and its citizens put their confidence in him. After they had gone out into the fields and gathered the grapes and trodden them, they held a festival in the temple of their God. While they were eating and drinking, they cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal, son of Ebed, said, "Who is Abimelech, and why should we Shechemites be subject to him? Isn't he Jerubaal's son, and isn't Zebul his deputy? Serve the family of Hamor, Shechem's father. Why should we serve Abimelech? If only this people were under my command, then I would get rid of him. I would say to Abimelech, call out your whole army." When Zebul, the governor of the city, heard what Gaal had said of Ebed, what Gaal, son of Ebed, said, he was very angry. Under cover, he sent messengers to Abimelech, saying, "Gaal, son of Ebed, and his clan have come to Shechem and are stirring up the city against you. Now then, during the night, you and your men should come and lie in wait in the fields. In the morning at sunrise, advanced against the city. Then Gaal and his men came out. When Gaal and his men come out against you, seize the opportunity to attack them." So Abimelech and all his troops set out by night and took up concealed positions near Shechem in 4 companies. Now Gaal, son of Ebed, had gone out and was standing at the entrance of the city gate, just as Abimelech and his troops came out from their hiding place. When Gaal saw them, he said to Zebul, "Look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains." And Zebul replied, "You mistake the shadows of the mountains for men." But Gaal spoke up again, "Look, people are coming down from the central hill, and a company is coming from the direction of the diviner's tree." Then Zebul said to him, "Where's your big talk now, you who said, 'Who is Abimelech, that we should be subject to him?' Aren't these the men you ridiculed? Go out and fight them." So Gaal led out the citizens of Shechem and fought Abimelech. Abimelech chased him all the way to the entrance of the gate, and many were killed as they fled. Then Abimelech stayed in Arumah, and Zebul drove Gaal and his clan out of Shechem. And so Gaal is turning the people of Shechem against Abimelech. But Zebul, his deputy, is like, "Well, I'm going to tell Abimelech to come in, put an end to this." And so it leads to this conflict between Gaal and his brigands and Abimelech and his mercenaries as they try to reestablish leadership in Shechem. And eventually Gaal is driven out, as well as all of Gaal's fighting men. And Zebul here is making a decisive move against Gaal, and we don't really get a ton of his motivations. We don't know why anybody actually likes Abimelech or wants Abimelech, so there's some kind of loyalty here. But he sets the trap and springs the trap, but seems to establish the Shechem back into the control of Abimelech. And so Zebul is Abimelech's deputy. Verse 42, the battle is over. The next day, the people of Shechem went out to the fields, and this was reported to Abimelech. So he took his men, divided them into 3 companies, and set an ambush in the fields. When he saw the people coming out of the city, he rose to attack them. Abimelech and the companies with him rushed forward to a position at the entrance of the city gate. Then 2 companies attacked those in the fields and struck them down. All that day, Abimelech pressed his attack against the city until he had captured it and killed its people. Then he destroyed the city and scattered salt over it. And so Zebul is like, let's set up reestablish Abimelech's governing here. But the people of Shechem, Abimelech doesn't trust him. And so he waits for them to come out to start working the fields again, and he slaughters them. He just kills, he takes his force and kills them as they are coming out to do the work, and presses the field all the way up against the walls of the city. And on hearing this, the citizens in the tower of Shechem went into the stronghold of the temple of El Berit, which is God of the covenant. When Abimelech heard that they had assembled there, he and all his men went up Mount Zalmon. He took an axe and cut off some branches, which he lifted to his shoulders. He ordered the men with him, "Quick, do what you have seen me do." So all the men cut branches and followed Abimelech. They piled them against the stronghold and set it on fire, with the people still inside. So all the people in the tower of Shechem, about 1,000 men and women, also died. Now, Jotham's prophecy against them is that fire will come out of Abimelech. And here, that's what's happening. Yeah, he is literally using fire to fight the people of Shechem and to punish them for even considering turning against him. Next, Abimelech went to Thebez and besieged it and captured it. Inside the city, however, was a strong tower, to which all the men and women, all the people of the city had fled. They had locked themselves in and climbed up on the tower roof. Abimelech went to the tower and attacked it. But as he approached the entrance to the tower to set it on fire, a woman dropped an upper millstone on his head and cracked his skull. Hurriedly, he called to his armor bearer, "Draw your sword and kill me, so that they can't say, 'A woman killed him.'" So his servant ran him through, and he died. When the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they went home. Thus, God repaid the wickedness that Abimelech had done to his father by murdering his 70 brothers. God also made the people of Shechem pay for all their wickedness. The curse of Jotham, son of Jerubbaal, came to them. So, yeah, I mean, this is a story where it's like, there are no good people in this story. I mean, Jotham maybe, but he still runs away. He's not leading. He's not trying to fight against Abimelech. He ran away. And so we see, though, that all of the unfaithfulness of the people of Shechem, the unfaithfulness of Abimelech, it's all coming down to their own destruction. And even as it seems like Abimelech is going to win, God uses an unlikely person to secure the victory over Abimelech. And it's a woman who brings the upper millstone. And so a mill would have like a flat area and then a stone on top that they would roll over to grind the wheat down. And so that upper millstone is heavy and it's valuable. And so if you're running away, you might want to keep that. And so this woman, for some reason, kept the upper millstone and took it up the tower. And then she saw that Abimelech was right there. So she used what she had as a weapon to fight against their enemy. And not unlike Jael and Sisera, she was able to defeat the unrighteous person. And so it's another one of those stories where God uses the unexpected person to bring about his justice. And so, yeah, so we don't know anything really about that woman other than she had the millstone. And when they see Abimelech is dead, the people of Israel, they'll just go home. They're like, all right, he's no longer a threat to us, and they left. And then so that's chapter 9, Abimelech. Chapter 10, we look at our first couple of minor judges. And we call them minor judges because there's really not a lot that we know about them. And one of the reasons we might not know a lot about them is because during the time when they were leading, there may have been more stability in the region. And so they didn't have great conflict. And we see some prosperity in this as well. One of the reasons why we may have these minor judges included is to cover all of the different tribes. All the tribes have an opportunity, other than Levi, have an opportunity to serve as judges in the in different capacities. And so it brings it to 12, which is a 12 total judges, which is a signal for the whole nation. So they were all a part of this book. So chapter 10, verse 1, after the time of Abimelech, a man of Issachar named Tola, son of Pua, the son of Dodo, rose to save Israel. He lived in Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim. He led Israel 23 years. Then he died and was buried in Shamir. So Shamir is often associated with Samaria, which would become the capital later in the divided kingdom. When there's the north kingdom and the southern kingdom, Samaria is the capital. And so a lot of different scholars would place Tola in Shamir. But yeah, we still don't know much. He led Israel for 23 years. And so Israel most likely led a portion of Israel for 23 years after Abimelech. And then the next one is Jair. And verse 3, he was followed by Jair of Gilead, who led Israel 22 years. He had 30 sons who rode 30 donkeys. They controlled 30 towns in Gilead, which to this day are called Havot Jair. When Jair died, he was buried in Kamon. And so these 30 sons and 30 donkeys and 30 towns, those are indicators of prosperity, of stability, and wealth, and sound governance over those 30 towns. And so Jair was somebody that is, we can read his story and say, oh, wow, he's kind of a good guy. He's kind of all right. And the Lord was blessing him in some way. Did he have a charismatic leadership style? Was he filled with the Spirit of God to overcome the enemies of the people of Israel? No, he's kind of boring, realistically. Like, he's kind of a boring person. And one of the things that I think we need to remember is it's okay, as you're following after the Lord, to be a boring person. Like, we don't have to be like superheroes. We don't have to try to be impressive to the world. But people like Jair and Tola, like, they're boring. But they had seasons of stability. They had seasons of prosperity in their leadership, and that's okay. So, because we also don't read anything in that about any unfaithfulness in these two leaders, which is also cool. So the next section, though, we get into Jephthah. And so Abimelech, is the daughter of a slave of Jerubbaal, all right, or the son of a slave woman that Jerubbaal had a relationship with. Jephthah is another level of degradation of the faithfulness of the people of Israel. Things continue to get bad with the state of Israel and their faithfulness or lack of faithfulness to the Lord. And Jephthah is in the middle of this downward slope. And so we see several different sections here. We see that Yahweh is in verses 10:6 through 16. Yahweh turns his heart against Israel, but he eventually relents. And then Jephthah fights against Gilead, which is a tribe in Israel, 10:17 through 11:11. And then Jephthah fights against the Ammonites, is 11:12 through 28. And then Jephthah makes a vow to the Lord about a sacrifice to God, and that's 29 through 40. And Jephthah then fights is against the Ephraimites, which is another tribe. And so in the story of Jephthah, we see division and civil war and conflict in Israel, even as Jephthah fights against the neighboring nation that is an enemy of Israel. So let's look at Jephthah here in verse 6. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They served the Baals and Ashtoreths and the gods of Aram, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, the gods of Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. So they are serving all the gods that they were told not to. And because the Israelites forsook the Lord and no longer served him, he became angry with them. He sold them into the hands of the Philistines and the Ammonites, who that year shattered and crushed them. For 18 years, they oppressed all the Israelites on the east side of the Jordan in Gilead, the land of the Amorites. The Ammonites also crossed the Jordan to fight against Judah, Benjamin, and Ephraim. Israel was in great distress. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord, "We have sinned against you, forsaking our God and serving the Baals." The Lord replied, and probably through a prophet of some sort, the Lord replied, "When the Egyptians, the Amorites, the Ammonites, the Philistines, the Sidonians, and the Amalekites, and the Maonites oppressed you, and you cried to me for help, did I not save you from their hands? But you have forsaken me and served other gods, so I will no longer save you. Go and cry out to the gods you have chosen. Let them save you when you are in trouble." But the Israelites said to the Lord, "We have sinned. Do with us whatever you think best, but please rescue us now." Then they got rid of the foreign gods among them and served the Lord, and he could bear Israel's misery no longer. And so we have this picture of the people and their wickedness, and the Lord's like, "All right, that's it. You've abandoned my covenant. I'm giving you over to the Philistines and the Ammonites, and they're going to fight against you and they're going to oppress you." And these are all things that God said he was going to do if they were unfaithful. So God keeps his word. And then eventually they're like, "We can't do this anymore. What are we doing?" And they repent, and God says, "You brought this on yourself." And he's like, "I'm not going to be just this yo-yo relationship with you," essentially. And so he says, "You've chosen these other gods. Let them save you. Let those other gods that you think are mighty and powerful, let them do the work." But they realize that those gods are nothing. Maybe somebody reminded them the stories of how God rescued the people of Israel from slavery in Egypt, and how he provided for them in the wilderness, and how he fought against their enemies as they were making their way to the land of the promise. And they realize their error, and so they eliminate these false gods from their midst, and they turn their heart back into covenant relationship, and God could bear their misery no longer. And so the Lord is compassionate. And one of the things that we should see in this book is the people of Israel are much more quick. They're much more ready to give up on God than God is ready to give up on them. And even when God's at the end of his rope, his compassion for his people is still characteristic of his very nature. And so he does hear them, and he can't let them continue to suffer. And so in verse 17, when the Ammonites were called to arms and camped in Gilead, the Israelites assembled and camped at Mizpah. The leaders of the people of Gilead said to each other, "Whoever will take the lead in attacking the Ammonites will be head over all who live in Gilead." Jephthah, the Gileadite, was a mighty warrior. His father was Gilead. His mother was a prostitute. Gilead's wife also bore him sons, and when they were grown up, they drove Jephthah away. "You are not going to get any inheritance in our family," they said, "because you are the son of another woman." So Jephthah fled from his brothers and settled in the land of Tob, where a gang of scoundrels gathered around him and followed him. So we have Jephthah, who is a mighty warrior, but the son of a prostitute. And so the older brothers, or the other brothers of Gilead's wife, drive him away, saying, we don't want anything to do with you. But there's an interesting little contrast between Jephthah and Abimelech. Abimelech hired these mercenaries, but Jephthah was a man, like a mighty warrior. So he had a military reputation of being good at his job. And this gang of scoundrels gathered around him and followed him. Jephthah didn't pay them. He didn't need to win them over with money, but they came to him because, he is a good leader. And so they came to him. So they're not great people. They are a gang of scoundrels still, but he has some leadership characteristics. Sometime later, when the Ammonites were fighting against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to Jephthah from the land of Tob. "Come," they said, "be our commander so we can fight the Ammonites." Jephthah said to them, "Didn't you hate me and drive me from my father's house? Why do you come to me now when you're in trouble?" The elders of Gilead said to him, Nevertheless, we are turning to you now. Come with us to fight the Ammonites, and you will be head over all of us who live in Gilead. Jephthah answered, suppose you take me back to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gives them to me. Will I really be your head? The elders of Gilead replied, the Lord is our witness. We will certainly do as you say. So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and commander over them. And he repeated all his words before the Lord in Mizpah. So there's more pressure from the Ammonites, and they're like, what are we going to do? And then we get introduced to this Jephthah person and his backstory, and they finally relent and say, okay, we need his help. He knows what he's doing. And so when he comes to them and he says, will you really have me as the head, the leader of your commanding forces, the leader of the towns of Gilead? He's skeptical, but they vow to him, the Lord is our witness. We make this vow. And so he agrees to go and be their leader. So he's negotiating with his own people to put him in place of authority. And so the next section, he also is going to do some attempted negotiation as well, which is, I think, one of the things that we should note here. He doesn't want to go to violence first, which is kind of cool. So verse 12, then Jephthah sent messengers to the Ammonite kings with the question, what do you have against me that you have attacked my country? The king of the Ammonites answered Jephthah's messengers, when Israel came up out of Egypt, they took away my land from the Arnon to the Jabbok, all the way to the Jordan. Now give it back peaceably. Jephthah sent back messengers to the Ammonite king saying, this is what Jephthah says, Israel did not take the land of Moab or the land of the Ammonites, but when they came up out of Egypt, Israel went through the wilderness to the Red Sea and on to Kadesh. Then Israel sent messengers to the king of Edom saying, give us permission to go through your country. But the king of Edom would not listen. They sent also to the king of Moab, and he refused. So Israel stayed at Kadesh. Next, they traveled through the wilderness, skirted the lands of Edom and Moab, passed along the eastern side of the country of Moab, and camped on the other side of the Arnon. They did not enter the territory of Moab, for the Arnon was its border. Then Israel sent messengers to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who ruled in Heshbon. And he said to them, let us pass through your country to our own place. Sihon, however, did not trust Israel to pass through the territory. He mustered all his troops and encamped at Jahaz and fought with Israel. Then the Lord, the God of Israel, gave Sihon and his whole army into Israel's hands, and they defeated them. Israel took over all the land of the Amorites who lived in that country, capturing all of it from the Arnon to the Jabbok and from the desert to the Jordan. So this is all a recap for Jephthah is telling the story. We've gone through the story with the book of Numbers, heading up back to the land that God had promised Abraham's descendants, and all of this, it checks out. He's saying the story, they didn't go into Moab, they didn't attack the Amorites. The Amorites came against them. Now, in verse 23, now since the Lord, the God of Israel, has driven the Amorites out before his people Israel, what right have you to take it over? Will you not take what your God Chemosh gives to you? Likewise, whatever the Lord our God has given us, we will possess. And so he says, if your Lord drove the Israelites out, you would take that land. But our God drove you out, and so he gave it to us. So we are just doing we're not trying to take things. God is giving things to us, is what Jephthah is saying here. And so verse 25, are you any better than Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab? Did he ever quarrel with Israel or fight with them? So that's an interesting question, because Balak tried to hire Balaam to curse the people of Israel, if we remember this, and it didn't work. And so then Balak tried to get the people to fall into sexual sin, and that was more successful based on Balaam's recommendation to them. And so did Balak quarrel with Israel or fight with them? Not in a traditional sense, but he was still trying to fight against them. But then there is a timeline of land claim here. For 300 years, Israel occupied Heshbon, Aroer, and the surrounding settlements and all the towns along the Arnon. Why didn't you retake them during that time? I have not wronged you, but you are doing me wrong by waging war against me. Let the Lord, the judge, decide the dispute this day between the Israelites and the Ammonites. And so Jephthah is giving all of the history, and then he's making these claims, saying, like, if your God did this, you would totally be right because your God won. And there was a higher understanding of the spiritual realities and the spiritual warfare around the rise and fall of governments and empires in the ancient world. And so if your country defeated another country and you both serve different gods, the natural response then would be, well, the victor's God is more powerful. And so he's kind of leaning into that here as well. And so he puts all these points out. He even talks about how long they've been in the land, and is like, you had all this time and you didn't take it. And so verse 29 then highlights this. Then the Spirit of the Lord came on Jephthah. So that's an empowerment from God to lead the people. He crossed Gilead and Manasseh, passed through Mizpah of Gilead, and from there he advanced against the Ammonites. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, if you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. So Jephthah has the power of God working in him, and the Spirit of the Lord came on him. And so he's going into battle, but he doesn't trust that that's enough. And so he asks the Lord to give him victory, and he makes a vow. And remember, when we were looking at the law and the vows are things that anybody could take, but they had to keep. And there were no specific instructions for people like, you do this vow for this reason. It's like, no, if you just make a vow, fulfill the vow. Why Jephthah made this vow is a mystery. So that's an important piece, because the actual talking of the battle is not very long. Then Jephthah went over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns from Recorde to the vicinity of Minnith, as far as Abel Keramim. Thus Israel subdued Ammon. So they won. Awesome. Victory. It's so good. It's wonderful. Verse 34, when Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of timbrels. She was only a child. Except for her, Jephthah, had neither son nor daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "Oh no, my daughter, you have brought me down, and I am devastated. I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." "My father," she replied, "you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you promised. Now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites, but grant me this one request." She said, "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." "You may go," he said, and he let her go for 2 months. She and her friends went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. After the 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed, and she was a virgin. From this comes the Israelite tradition that each year the young women of Israel go out for 4 days to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. So, victory. But Jephthah made this vow: whatever comes first to meet me, I will offer to the Lord. And this vow is a conditional promise, and it's usually a gift made to God. And nowhere in the Bible does the Lord actually want human sacrifice. But Jephthah there's different people who've tried to make some kind of sense of Jephthah's actions here. And maybe he thought an animal would come out to meet him and he would make an animal sacrifice, which that would be a good and right thing. But the reading, it's like, no, it seems like Jephthah is okay. Maybe a servant comes out and he'll make that sacrifice of a servant. So while Jephthah is empowered by God, he's not actually trusting that the Spirit of God is enough. So he makes this vow to try to convince God that how serious he is. And nowhere in this narrative, in this passage, do we see that God wanted this. God didn't tell him to make this vow, but he did it anyway. But he also knows that breaking a vow to the Lord is not a good thing either. And so people try to make sense of this to say, like, okay, maybe Jephthah didn't sacrifice his daughter. Maybe she just was lived in the woods and was a virgin forever. Maybe she just went and served at the tabernacle as a virgin forever. She never married. That was the sacrifice. The Jephthah's line didn't continue. But the text doesn't say that. The text says he did exactly what he said he was going to do. And so this roaming the hills for 2 months is a period of grief for her and for him and for the community and her friends. And so this is an intense passage that is just in there. Like, here's a person who is trying to do something to help the people of Israel, makes a rash vow, and now is stuck with the consequences of that rash vow. And the only noble person here really is Jephthah's daughter, who's innocent. And she trusts the Lord, and that the Lord was able to get secure this victory. And so she's willing to submit to the Lord's plan as she sees it. But it's hard to say that this is the Lord's plan, because God never commanded Jephthah to do this, and God never wants human sacrifice anywhere else in the Bible. But here it is. Here's the test for Jephthah, and he does what he said he would do. But that doesn't solve the problem. Yes, he had the victory over the Ammonites, but then we have the Ephraimites in verse 12. The Ephraimite forces were called out, and they crossed over to Zaphon. They said to Jephthah, "Why did you go to fight the Ammonites without calling us to go with you? We're going to burn down your house over your head." Jephthah answered, "I and my people were engaged in a great struggle with the Ammonites, and although I called, you didn't save me out of their hands. When I saw that you wouldn't help, I took my life in my own hands and crossed over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave me the victory over them. Now, why have you come up today to fight me?" Jephthah then called together the men of Gilead and fought against Ephraim. The Gileadites struck them down because the Ephraimites had said, "You Gileadites are renegades from Ephraim and Manasseh." The Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan leading to Ephraim, and whenever a survivor of Ephraim said, "Let me cross over," the men of Gilead asked, "Are you an Ephraimite?" If he replied, "No," they said, "All right, say Shibboleth." And if he said Sibboleth, because he could not pronounce the word correctly, they seized him and killed him at the fords of the Jordan. 42,000 Ephraimites were killed at that time. Jephthah led Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in a town in Gilead. And so Ephraim, the tribe of Ephraim, complains like, "Hey, you were fighting the enemies. Why didn't you call us?" Jephthah's response is like, "Hey, I tried, but you were busy. You didn't come. So we couldn't wait any longer." But this led to warfare between the two tribes. And this is the selfishness of the people on display. And I wonder if Jephthah in his grief is like not thinking clearly and like, well, we're going to go fight our brothers here. Maybe the Ephraimites wanted to be a part of it so that they could reap some of the bounty, some of the plunder from fighting the Ammonites. We don't really know, other than they're saying like, we should be a part of these kinds of things with you. You should have invited us to fight with you. But it just leads to this conflict that goes on for some time, because when they are able to defeat the Ephraimites. The people of Jephthah, they have established a crossing point at the river, and it was all about like your accent, basically your dialect, your the way you talked, the way you spoke was the determiner on whether you lived or died when you tried to cross the river. And so they couldn't say Shibboleth. And so the Gileadites killed any person that came over that said Sibboleth. And so we see the people of Israel decline. The enemies are no longer just external forces, neighboring people. It's now the tribes are fighting against each other. And, it just notes here as we get to the end of Jephthah's life, he was sick. He led 6 years. And, he had no sons, he had no daughters. He just died. And we don't even know, he was just buried in a town in Gilead. We don't know where, just somewhere in that region. And so his life kind of fades away. And then we have the last section here, three more minor judges. Verse 8, after him, Ibzan of Bethlehem, not the Bethlehem that David was from, but at Bethlehem north in Zebulun. He led Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. He gave his daughters away in marriage to those outside his clan. And for his sons, he brought in 30 young women as wives from outside his clan. Ibzan led Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried in Bethlehem. And so here we have another example of somebody who leads with some kind of stability and is not totally crazy. He has wealth. He is building these alliances with other clans as he's marrying his sons and daughters between these different clans. So he's trying to build some stability, but led for 7 years, died, buried in Bethlehem. After him, Elon, the Zebulunite, led Israel 10 years. Then Elon died and was buried in Aijalon in the land of Zebulun. After him, Abdon, son of Hillel from Pirathon, led Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys. He led Israel 8 years. Then Abdon, son of Hillel, died. He was buried in Pirathon in Ephraim in the hill country of the Amalekites. And so we have these three more minor prophets or minor judges. They seem to be non-eventful, seems to have some kind of stability happening over these years, but they are not major people to talk about, but they are, again, leaders over the people of Israel. And it seems like there is some kind of peace during those times. So that is Judges chapters 9 through 12. Any thoughts or questions on these chapters and these stories? No?
I as always, I always have fun, Jason.
Oh, it's great, Carrie.
I got a question. Back early on in that one town where you said he put salt over it.
Yeah.
What is the purpose of that?
That is a good question. It is, there's a couple different theories about why he would do that. I took note on it, but I didn't say it. So there's one theory is that it is a sign of some kind of perpetual desolation, like this, may this place never be rebuilt kind of thing. Kind of when you salt a field, that was something that people would do in the ancient world. It would make it hard to grow any crops in that field. So the similar kind of thing. That's one theory. That doesn't always actual work that way though. So it also could have been a ritual act. And not trying to say like you're literally not going to be prosperous anymore, but just kind of a ritual to just kind of curse them essentially. The other one, and this is a bit longer. This is from the Bible background commentary, and talks about how this doesn't really happen anywhere else in the Bible, but it does happen. We do read about these kinds of things in other cultures. So the Assyrians and the Amharic Sapphire Treaty, they did a similar thing as a curse to salt the land, but it also was another chemically type thing that would make it difficult for the town to be rebuilt or to flourish again. So, I mean, it's basically just we're going to destroy you and make it hard to rebuild is the consensus for why you would do that, but it's not totally explained in this passage. So,
well, what came to me when I heard that is the fact that, Lot's wife, when she turned back to look at Sodom and Gomorrah, she turned to a pillar of salt. Is that a salt a sign of a curse?
Well, that's tough because salt is good, and when it has a purpose, right? Jesus tells his disciples later, like, you are the salt of the earth. Right. So salt isn't a bad thing. And so here it is a kind of cursing of this town, but it isn't, we can't say across the board it's always a sign of a curse. So yeah, so Lot's wife looking back and turning it into that pillar of salt, that's a curse. This situation is a curse. Are those connected? And like, can we make that like as a straight line connection? Not really. Maybe like a dotted line connection, like interesting, but I wouldn't make it a major point. So
okay. I just didn't know if there was any real big symbolism. I mean, I think when you put salt on your land, the salt withers everything up, dries everything up, all the nutrients in the plants and stuff.
Yeah, right. That's essentially that's the theory, that's what would happen when you do that to the fields, and maybe that's why they would do that to this town of Shechem. But yeah, it's a bad thing that they're trying to do. We can get that much for sure. It's not nice. So yeah, any other thoughts, questions?
It's interesting that the Ephraimites in Gilead,
Gileadites.
Yeah. When the Gileadites asked for help, they're like, "Hey, we're not here." Kind of like Eagleton, Pawnee, the whole town without the whole town. But
that's a Parks and Recreation reference. If you haven't watched Parks and Recreation, I highly recommend that show. It's very funny. So,
but yeah, it's interesting that they're like, "Yeah, we're not home," when they need help, but then when they see all the plunder, they're like, "Hey, why didn't you call us?" Like pretending that didn't happen, and then surprised that that they'd be upset.
Yeah.
But
people are pretty terrible. I don't know if you know this. There's a lot of terrible things about people across the board. There's just there's bad things, and here's like they're in the Bible too.
Yeah. And I just think it's funny that they give an accent test to like say this word, like this is how we tell if people are from Washington. We have to say either Puget Sound or Puyallup,
right?
Or Snohomish. That for some reason that trips people up. But yeah, say this word. Oh, guess you're not from around here.
You're not from here. Yeah, I was listening to a podcast that was talking about an island in Michigan, and I'm from Michigan. It's called Mackinac Island, but it's spelled Mackinac Island. And it's one of those things that it's like, if somebody says Mackinac, you're just like, you're now the dumbest person in the world. Like, how could you possibly? Even though it's spelled wrong.
Yeah.
So Sibboleth, Shibboleth, like there are things that we use as cultural dividers even today.
Yeah.
So but if somebody like says Mackinac, don't kill them. Not worth it.
Don't drown them in the river. All right.
No. And it's a
That's
lake
like
at
when I
that
was
point.
in Texas.
Chicken
That's when I
whale.
was in Texas. Yeah, San Antonio. You point out this word, the word Quileute River. They couldn't figure that one out for the life of them. They're like, what? I said
Yeah.
Quileute. Oh, that's not exactly how they go. If you pronounce it, that's not how you say it. I'm like, it is. It's how we say it.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. We don't need to fight about it.
Yeah.
So yeah. Any other thoughts? This is a pretty depressing section of Judges. I have some good news, bad news. Good news is there's more judges. Bad news is there's more depressing sections later. So like this, the book, like if you read it as like, these are exciting stories. And that's very exciting. And like I said, when we started this section of scripture, like I love this book. It is why I love the Bible, like, because this book. But the more I read it, the more heartbreak I have every time, because you just see like when people don't honor the Lord, things go badly, and it's their fault. It's that's what Judges is telling us. They have no one to blame but themselves.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, I kind of have one more. I just don't understand. I think I've said this before. I don't understand what their big pull was to always go back to the Baal and Ashtoreth,
Yeah.
their idols. What was their big pull to that? What kept drawing them back to that?
Couple
Was more-
things.
Yeah.
One is the methodology of their worship was appealing to the flesh of the people. So there may have been like ritual sex that was happening in sacrificial systems and those kinds of things, and prostitutes and all of this different stuff that was a part of the cult of Baal and Ashtoreth that was attractive to the carnal nature of the people. So that's one thing. The other thing is they the spiritual realm, their understanding in that ancient world was like different gods had different purposes. And so if they wanted fertility in their crops and their agriculture, then Baal is the way to go with this. Like he promises fertility. So why not do that? Why not follow that? And so the appeal is pleasure and pragmatism is essentially what it comes down to. What is the most, what seems to be the most effective thing that I can manipulate for my own good? It's not good. Like these are false gods. These are demonic forces that are deceiving the people, but they also tell them what they want to hear. So idolatry then and idolatry now. It is pleasure, pragmatism, telling me what I want to hear. I'm happy to pay the money to be deceived the way I want to be deceived, is what it comes down to. And that is still the nature of idolatry today. So
can I ask you one question on that? Would that be, I mean, I don't know what your take is on this, but the idea of prosperity, the prosperity gospel thing.
mm-hmm.
I was wondering about that. Oh, if you do this and you'll be blessed even more. I'm like, God says he'll bless you. It doesn't say he'll bless you more and more and more, just by one thing.
Right. Yeah. The prosperity gospel is one of the most dangerous things that the American church is exporting around the world, because it looks like it works, but it works for a few people, but it devastates so many other people, because the people it works the best for are the people at the top. And it's just dangerous. It's just dangerous. And so one of the challenges is when we talk about like the prosperity gospel methodology often is, if you put in X tithe, the Lord will bring back X tithe to you to the power of 10 or whatever, right? Like you give and give and give, God will give you, give. But the way the Bible talks about generosity and tithes and offerings is God has already given you. He is good first, and your tithes and offerings are an act of worship because of his goodness, not because of what you can get again. And so it's not an investment into your future blessing is not how we should talk about giving tithes and offerings. It should always be like, I'm going to worship God with what he has blessed me with. And that's it. That's the end of the whole conversation. And when we get to those kinds of formulaic attempts to manipulate God into blessing us more, that's idolatry. We are now serving mammon instead of Yahweh because the God of wealth is mammon. And so we pursue that. And yeah, then we miss what God wants for us in all of that deception. So I got some thoughts on prosperity gospel.
Yeah. I think of it as witchcraft. Like you're saying the right things and doing the right things to get a desired result.
Yeah, it's not far.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I would
it
say
is.
tickling their ears.
What'd you say?
Tickling their ears,
Yeah.
like in the Bible it says they, tickle their ears. Make it
Right.
allow them to hear what they want to hear, not what the truth is.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's the same kind of draw towards celebrity culture in general in America is the same kind of draw that we have towards the prosperity gospel in so many churches. As we see these people who are just like us, right? They're doing great. Well, let's learn more about their life. Let's learn more about them. And instead of trying to say, Lord, what do you want me to do? Who do you want me to be? We try to be like other people and follow their like 10 easy steps for wealth and health and all these different things. It's like, no, just stop. Stop. Yeah, it's a dangerous thing. So
Yeah, that is one thing I've always wondered. Why does everybody want to be like somebody else? Why not be happy with who you are?
wow. Yeah. I mean, if you can answer that and convince people of a good answer for that, then yeah.
Well, my answer is we are fearfully and wonderfully created, and it was to be that way. God made us individual for a reason.
Yes. Totally believe you. I totally agree with you. But it's getting that message into people's hearts. That's the hard part.
Yeah.
So that, yeah. Any other thoughts or questions? No? All right.
Yeah, one more.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's okay.
The festival, after he had to kill his daughter, it says the festival is still a festival for 4 days.
Yeah.
Or they observe it for 4 days, they go somewhere. Is it still in play? Where do they go? What do they do? Is it a festival? Is it still observed?
I don't know of anybody who is doing that today. So when they say things like from this comes the tradition each year, like that is something that the ancient world, the people reading this, the original audience would have known about. But it was never one of the commanded festivals from the Lord. And so it's just more of a cultural response. And so I don't know anybody, I've never heard of anyone doing that, going out for 4 days with their girlfriends to go camping. Like that's basically what it is. It's like a girlfriend's camping trip. So people might do that, but they might not call it the remembrance of Jephthah's daughter. But yeah, so it's not a ongoing thing.
I thought it sounded like a shortened version of the Rumspringer from the community. But,
yeah, probably not as wild.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Boy, Jephthah really makes it, hit home. Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, that's true. And like when you try to preach through a passage like this, it's like, what do you even preach on? Like that's it. That's the only thing. Like, hey, careful what you wish for. So,
True.
and as Christians, we don't wish. We don't make wishes. We pray.
Yeah.
We ask the Lord. Jephthah did none of that. So, yeah.
He bartered with the Lord. He
Right.
didn't pray.
Yeah, that's essentially what that was. So, all right.
Intense.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, y'all, on that note, good night. All right. We'll be back next week, and we'll be talking about Samson, a story we tell children all the time. And again, not a good dude. So, yeah, so we'll be back next week. Have a good one, everyone.
You too.
I
All right. Thank you,
Right.
Jason.
You bet.